On Rosh Hashanah, we reflected on where we were, where we are, and where we want to go. On Yom Kippur, we face a much deeper and a much more profound question. What's our legacy? Legacy. It's quite the idea. It immediately makes us think about our deaths. But legacy, it's not really about our deaths. Legacy is about what we are leaving to the world. Death, it's just a moment. But legacy, it persists beyond us. Crafted by what we do with our time, that very short time we have here on earth. And Rosh Hashanah, it's built with tools to make us reflect on our lives. And then we gain insights into our behaviors, the changes that need to be made, hopefully course correct along the way, and ultimately leading us to today, to Yom Kippur, where we move to questions of legacy. When we read the Vidui, the confessional prayer, we face mortality straight in the face as a community. And a lot of us, we think about the I. What's my legacy? How will I be remembered? What have I done with my life? That's the kind of traditional reflection and contemplation we do around death. What have I done with my time? But here's the thing. If you take a moment and we just do a little bit of a thought experiment about how we will be remembered, we're quickly reminded that we need to think about us, not I. So I want you to take a moment. Think about your parents' name and think about what they stood for. Now, if you know your grandparents' name and what they stood for, I want you to raise your hand. Okay? And I want you to keep that hand up. Keep it up. Keep it up if you know your great-grandparents' name and what they stood for. Great-great? Great-great-great? Great-great-great-great. We made it to 4. Alan, you're at 4? What about 5? I can do a bid here. Do I get 5? You got 5 and I've lost Alan. And so suddenly, when you see this, you go, come on, really? That's all we can remember. And that's the blood, it's coursing through our veins. And we made it through 4 generations. Alan, you made it through 5. And this is not a normal group in this room. This is serious selection bias in here. Because you all have taken a day out of your life to reflect on your life and to meditate on the existence of being. And we went back, 3 generations? 4? So what does that mean for us? In 100 years, will they know your name? What you stood for? 200 years, 500 years, and then quickly we suddenly realize when I'm talking about legacy, I couldn't be talking about you, and I'm not talking about me, because the I, it really doesn't last very long. Legacy, it's actually about the we. Now, if I asked you what the Jewish people were doing 100 years ago in 1924, you may talk about the rise of Zionism after the 1917 Balfour Declaration, declaring for the establishment of the Jewish homeland in our ancestral country of origin. If I went back 200 years, you may talk about the harsh life of the Jewish people in the Pale Settlement of the Russian Empire. You may look to France and think about, right after the French Revolution, the integration of Jews. If I take you back 500 years to 1492, suddenly you think Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of Jews, and that comes to mind. And suddenly, all of us have memories. We know what that group of Jews did. We know about the challenges that they faced, what they confronted, and we also know how they adapted to their moments in time, and ultimately, what that generation stood for. So, rather than thinking about my legacy, each one of us should be thinking about our legacy. Because I will not be remembered, but we absolutely will be remembered. Now, to understand how we, Congregation Emanu-El, collectively in this moment in time can craft our legacy, we first need to explore why the Jewish people? I mean, of all the people throughout history, it's the Jewish people who remain with the longest legacy in the history of the world. Why is that? It's not that we haven't gone through challenges. Trust me, we've gone through some challenges. It's not that we haven't gone through great periods of time, because we did that too. But all people go through challenges and great periods of time. What makes the Jewish people different? Rabbi B'nai Lappi has a theory called the crash theory that explains how Judaism has approached our history. She explains that every community of people operates with a coherent set of beliefs, values, or narratives that define their story and their identity. And that guides their decision. This is known as the master story. Now, at some point, every community encounters a crash that reveals that that master story, it no longer holds up to their present reality, and it'll change. Now, this could be new information, it could be societal change, or events that makes that group's narrative crash. Now, in Judaism, we have experienced a series of crashes throughout the millennia. With the crash of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Judaism was predicated on the existence within a single centralized temple in Judaism, and that ended. Then in the 17th century, tens of thousands of Jews were massacred by the Cossacks in Ukraine. And the prosperity the Jews had experienced in the early part of the 17th century, that came crashing down. And when crashes such as these, when they occur, you're only left with three options: deny, abandon, or change. Now, option one is deny that the crash happened. And one just continues living by their existing master story, even though it doesn't really fit into current reality. The technical Talmudic term of this is la 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 la. Now, if you haven't guessed it, denial, it doesn't work. If you choose option one, you cease to exist. And then there's option two. You abandon the existing master story entirely, and you walk away and you quit. And after every one of our crashes, some Jews have completely abandoned their Jewish identity and their community. It's why when you hear people, when they take the 23andMe test, and they're shocked that they have a Jewish marker inside their DNA, that's where that comes from. And then finally, there's option three: change. Now, you don't deny the crash or walk away, but you see that the master story, it has changed, and it needs to be reworked into a new understanding and a new framework that incorporates the current reality caused by the crash. This is what Judaism and Jews have been doing for thousands upon thousands of years, and it's why we are sitting here today. See, here's how we've engaged with change during previous crashes. When that Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, Judaism changed its master story from being a religion centralized in a single temple in a single location in Jerusalem. Yochanan ben Zakkai, he took parts of our tradition and he reworked it into a new model where Judaism was decentralized. And it was the very first stage of the democratization of Judaism. There would no longer be a single high priest or a chief rabbi or a senior rabbi who would be in charge. Rather, all the rabbis would do is just ask questions and engage with the changes and the challenges and ultimately the crashes that would arise throughout time. And then the group of rabbi leaders, which, to be clear, could be anyone who was educated enough to receive that status. And that would become the collective group that would guide Judaism as it metamorphosized over time. So in Spain, in the 8th to 15th century, when we went through the Spanish Reconquista, Jews lost all access to power and freedom and eventually were expelled in 1492. Now, when this happens, The rabbis, they see that they're losing all power in the world, so they pivot into the mystical world. And they develop the Kabbalah and the Zohar. Starting in the 17th century, when Jewish life in Eastern Europe and Russia Empire, it was unbearable, that's when the Baal Shem Tov arose in the 18th century, and it created Hasidism, where God was no longer found on the outside, since the outside world was miserable. And instead, we found God within us. This became the foundation for not only a new type of mysticism, but if I can heal what's within me, then I can heal what's outside of me. Fun fact, this became the foundation for cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, crashes, they're incredibly normal. One could argue that they're cyclical. In 1997, William Strauss and Neil Howe introduced a theory called the fourth turn, which shows that going back to the 1500s, every 83 years, there is a major crash in the fourth generation of citizens. So let's do some math. When was the American Revolution? 1776. If you add 83 to 1776, you get 1859. The Civil War is in 1861. Take 1859, add another 83, 1942, World War II. Take 83 and add it to 1942, 2025. Now, it's why some would argue that Israel has appeared to be teetering on the inside with the protests last summer before October 7th. They are the fourth generation. We too in America are in the fourth generation. Strauss and Howe in 1997 predicted that 2025 would be the next turning point in that 600-year history cycle. Now, there are many that would argue that we are in the midst of the crash right now. A serious challenge to our master narrative of who we are as Jews in America. Now, I think in the span of historic time, these past 75 years are one of extreme tumult for Jews and for Judaism. And I would argue that our mid-20th century master story, it is no longer relevant due to the dislocation caused by the worst moment in all of Jewish history. Worse than the destruction of the temple, worse than Egypt, it was the Holocaust. And then just a few years later, we moved to the very highest moment in all of Jewish history, the establishment of Israel, to the incredible explosion of Judaism in America, to us being shaken to our core on October 7th, 2023. We are right inside of the evolution to a new master narrative. Right now, us. We see a society that is changing around us, and we are faced once again with three options. And we choose the third one again, change. Now, what do we need to do now that our master story seems to have changed? We have an opportunity to be the authors of our new master story. But how? How do you go about this daunting task? And you see, the answer is, it's right here. You see, part of the genius of rabbinic Judaism is that wisdom can only be found by bringing people together. Now, if I take in Greek, the word together is sun, and the word bring is agian. If I combine those two, you get synagogia. It's not till Middle English that we start calling it a synagogue. There had been only one sacred space, the temple in Jerusalem. But with the development of rabbinic Judaism, that place of sacredness, it shifted from being that hill in Jerusalem to wherever you could bring Jewish people together. Now, wisdom and truth are to be found in the community center where the people were meeting together, the synagogia. Now, if we pool our wisdom and our experience within our community, and we wrestle with the great questions facing us today, we, as the collective, we sit at the table of the 21st century, where crash and tradition are staring us straight in the face. This is what the entire building has been about. The design of the courtyard, it has no center. The spotlight, it's not on the rabbi, but rather it's meant to be a beehive where we are pushed into each other as a community, where we can see each other, where we can hear each other. And for 2,000 years, it was in the heart of the synagogue that Jews gathered as a community to grapple with the need to change the current master story in the face of a crash. That's why the legacy of the Jewish people is one of the oldest on the entire planet. How we will be remembered is by how and if we engage with the most pressing questions facing us today. Congregation Emanu-El in San Francisco, it is arguably one of the great synagogues in the history of Judaism. The first woman cantor ever in Judaism started right here. This community has led on important initiatives shaping our cities for 175 years, from the founding of San Francisco to its rebuilding after the 1906 earthquake, to bringing in refugees during World War II, to leading the response to the AIDS crisis, to saving old-growth redwood forests, to becoming the central address for Syrian refugees, to helping rebuild Santa Rosa when it burned down, to resettling Ukrainian families in our community today. Our teams go out working soul to soul with homeless at City Hope. And I could go on and on. Trust me, I could go on and on. And we have to ask ourselves, what's our role? Our role is to be a genuine community, a place where everybody knows your name. Because if we are not such a sacred community, the relationships and the webs of those connections, they won't exist for us collectively to carry out the audacious goals to shape this city, to shape this country, and to shape this world, and to craft a new master story. It's by coming to celebrate at peak moments. That is what Rabbi Rena Singer was talking about. That's the joy. And it's about coming together in those times of despair, to debate with each other, seeking truth that has led us to community. Now, to be clear, there is not a single text in all of Judaism that says, this is how you make community. Rather, it says, show up. And it turns out, if you're with a bunch of people who are showing up on a consistent clip and trying to do sacred work together, every once in a while, a sacred community is formed. I grew up in a Havurah that would get together for potluck meals every Jewish holiday and Thanksgiving. And at these meals, they would be laughing. There would be kids running around the house. I was usually in trouble. And we had that experience of that joy that we heard about last night. And we did this again and again and again until I was in college, when one of the members of the Havurah died. Now, at that moment, the Havurah sprung into action. We gathered at the family's house. We put the shiva together. And then just a few years later, in that same family, the other parent died. And all three kids were orphans. They no longer had a parent to care for them into their 20s. And the Havurah, it fell into that same pattern. And it showed up, and it cared for the kids. And then before we knew it, it was the Havurah that paid for the rehearsal dinner at the wedding. It was the Havurah that walked the bride down the aisle. And it's the Havurah to this day that babysits for those grandchildren. Now, those meals and that laughter we had with the Havurah on a regular cadence, they were far more than meals. They were building the foundation, not of a sense of community, because what's a sense of community? It was building a real community. Now, we stand on this Yom Kippur on grounds that are shaky, and at times it can feel like they're liquefying beneath our feet. And very possibly, we are in the middle of a crash. The world that we once knew, it has radically changed. And we too, we are left with three options: denial, abandonment, and change. And we are not in denial or people that will stay static and refuse to change. And we are absolutely not going to abandon this beautiful tradition. Rather, you see, that right there, that's the complete democratization of Judaism. It's no longer just the rabbis asking and addressing the most important and pressing questions that are chasing us as a generation. Because we are lucky enough to be the generation standing at this moment. We're no longer just doing what we've always done, but we have an opportunity to shape what the next chapter in this ancient and always changing tradition needs to be. In 2,000 years, we have not been faced with such a revolutionary moment as the past 75 years has thrown at us. And we have the opportunity to step into the synagogue, to shape the future. So in 100 years, in 200 years, in 500 years from now, generations of the Jewish people, they're going to look back on this moment and they're going to marvel at the seemingly obvious shifts that we made to adapt our tradition to the realities of our time. Now is our time and now is our opportunity. And never, ever forget, especially today, when legacy is at the very heart of our discussion, that we were already ancestors. The question we need to answer is if we're going to become great ancestors today. Will we show up for this sacred mission? Gamar Chatima Tova.